Welcome everyone to the first Horizon 3 Biotech Investing webinar for 2021, hosted by Horizon 3 Biotech Fund and sponsored and conducted by FB Rights and Monsoon Communications. This webinar is being recorded. Before we begin, the disclaimer, the purpose of this presentation is not to give financial product advice. If any financial product advice is given in the presentation, the standard disclaimers that it is general advice only apply. That is, it has been prepared without taking into account any person's objectives, financial situation or needs, and therefore you should consider the appropriateness of the advice in light of your own situation and requirement. Done. Today we are very fortunate to have two experienced biotech executives, Dr. Malcolm McColl and, by popular demand, Scott Power. Malcolm McColl has more than 20 years experience in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industries, serving in senior level business development positions at both international and regional companies with a focus on the oncology field. And most of this audience will recall that Malcolm led the successful sale of Viralytics to Merck in 2018 for 504 million Aussie dollars, I think that was. Malcolm can correct me later. Prior to joining Viralytics, he was Vice President Business Development at Star Pharma and responsible for partnering activities and programs. Before joining Star Pharma, he held senior European and Asia Pacific business development roles with Hospira and CSL, where he spent 13 years, culminating with 4 years in the US as Vice President Global Business Development for the Animal Health Division. Malcolm is currently the CEO of Envirix. Scott Power, known to most of you also, has spent the last 30 years investing and researching emerging companies. Scott is a senior analyst at Morgans Financial, focused on ASX-listed healthcare and life science stocks. He has also held the role of investment manager in the venture capital industry at QIDC for over a decade, where he helped identify and analyse large-scale investment opportunities. Today, we will be discussing 2020, the year that was, and what we can expect in 2021. Both Malcolm and Scott will be more than happy to take your questions later. So please use the Q&A function on your Zoom screen anytime, and we will address as many of these as possible when we answer also the pre-submitted questions, which there were a few. First, we're doing Matt on the Horizon, where I comment on some of the important developments impacting our sector and thus investment objectives. Jazz Pharmaceuticals has announced that it will acquire GW Pharma for a total consideration of $7.2 billion US. GW is focused on the discovery and development of therapeutics from its proprietary cannabinoid product platform. The company's lead product is Epidiolex, cannabidiol oral solution, which is approved in patients aged 1 and older for the treatment of seizures. Some of you may have noticed new activity with long-time ASX Biotech Bionomics, which struggled in 2018, and its share price dropped from around 55 cents to 4 cents. A feature in the Weekend Australian a couple of weeks ago highlighted new involvement by 42-year-old German billionaire Christian Angermayer, whose quest is the use of psychedelics, especially magic mushrooms and MDMA, which none of us would know about, of course, aka ecstasy, in treating mental illness, and also combining these with Bionomics BNC210 to potentially treat PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. He and colleagues recently invested a further 15.9 million in Bionomics. The recent round included PayPal co-founder Peter Thiel, Biotech Value Fund, and Merck. Bionomics share price is, last time I looked, was around 40 cents, market cap back up to 300 million. Pharmaxis dispatched its first commercial shipment of the cystic fibrosis drug Bronchitol to the US, where it will be sold by Chasey Pharmaceutici. This brings to the total 19 countries where the drug is now sold. Pharmaxis has also enrolled the first patient in its phase 1C/2A clinical trials, studying a potential new treatment for the bone marrow cancer myelofibrosis. PXX5505 is the lead asset in Pharmaxis' drug discovery pipeline, and the trial aims to demonstrate safety and efficacy and expected to report later this year. Private Brisbane diagnostic company, Ellume, has signed a US $232 million deal with the US Department of Defense to produce at-home SARS-CoV-2 tests in the US. This follows from clinical studies showing the self-user test with an accuracy of 96%. The test was granted emergency use authorization by the FDA in December for at-home use in symptomatic and asymptomatic people, and is the first such test to be approved. ASX listed MicroX secured a big funding raising of 30.5 million Aussie with a private placement and an SPP. This now funds key milestones, including development and launch of its mobile backscatter imaging instrument, the MBI, by mid next year, and completing its contract with the US Department of Homeland Security to design the next generation airport screening booths to use its 3D X-ray imaging system. And CAR T cell therapy company Chimeric Therapeutics made a strong debut on the ASX recently, with its share price up 60% on its opening after raising $35 million. Chimeric is commercializing research from the City of Hope Cancer Center in LA, with an initial focus on glioblastoma. Phase 1 study in 18 patients commenced late last year. Now, to our panelists and the questions. Scott, can I start with you? At the start of 2021, how did you characterize expectations for the year ahead? And given we're partway into that, how is that panning thus far?
Yeah, interesting question. So we were really positive at the start of 2021. A couple of reasons for that. Firstly, optimism around the vaccine rollout. At the beginning of the year, there were a couple of vaccines approved. We've had a few more. So that sort of gave a lot of optimism. There was still a lot of government stimulus flowing into economies, and that was actually landing into the hands of consumers. So consumers around the world were spending despite some pretty dire news headlines, and then the market generally was finished the year very strongly, and investors were looking for COVID exit trades. So travel stocks, the restart of elective surgery saw a lot of the healthcare names really post some very strong second quarter results coming through. So if you look at the IVF players, the pathology players, the radiology players, they all had really good December quarters. So that sort of led us into feeling really positive. Offsetting that was the strength of the Australian dollar. So any of those big healthcare companies that generated income overseas, that was a bit of a headwind. How's it panned out? So we're sort of 2 months into 2021, a little more neutral is our view, but still broadly positive. And the reason for that is that the bond market has really rallied strongly, and that's usually seen as a negative for the stock market. So we've seen Treasury yields in the US move up sharply, albeit off a very low base through February, and that's sort of created a little bit of nervousness around the markets. So basically positive, but just I think markets are watching those bond yields.
Thanks for that, Scott. And just a reminder to everyone, if you do want to ask the gentleman a question, use your Q&A button down the bottom. So Scott, to state the obvious, 2020 was a year like no other. What kind of hangovers from 2020 might we expect in 2021?
Well, I think you're right. It was a year like no other. So, I mean, in a nutshell, in terms of healthcare and life science, it was an extraordinary year. I think there was about $1.7 billion raised in across the equity market in Australia. So we picked that number up from the BioShares publication. And even in that last quarter, so the December quarter, there were 38 capital raisings and 3 IPOs coming through, raising over $600 million. So it was an extraordinary period of capital raising. So that was that euphoria that was really in the market. In terms of the hangovers or what's continued on, we've still seen those capital markets fairly buoyant. We had Mesoblast raise, almost $140 million the other day. You mentioned MicroX, raising $30+ million. There's still a lot of money out there. And given what happened last year in terms of the capital raisings, I mentioned there were 38 companies that had raised money in that last quarter. If we go back to the previous 3 quarters, I think there was an average of about 30 companies per quarter. So about 120 companies across the sector have raised money. So they're in a really good position to go forward into 2021. So one of the other hangovers that we've probably got is that by most measures, some of the valuations of the companies are looking extended. But my view is that these bond markets will stay, won't continue to move too high, and we'll have a continuing strong 2021.
So just explain to me, valuations extended?
Just looking expensive.
Expensive, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. And Malcolm, what changes have you seen across our sector that impact your business aspirations?
Well, I guess, we've been following cancer immunotherapy for many years. And I guess once I left Viralytics, / Merck, really sort of tracking that space. And we continue to see really good outcomes in melanoma patients and lung cancer, bladder cancer, and so on, where we're getting really high response rates and good duration of response. Biotech, I think, from Viralytics, now Merck obviously will be part of that story, where we saw excellent responses. But where we kind of saw cancer types where there wasn't the traction of immunotherapy was really in places like colorectal, ovarian, gastric cancer, and so on. And we really thought there'd be an opportunity there for us to establish a new company, essentially with the Viralytics team, and try to tackle those tumor types. So look for an oncolytic virus, obviously different to Biotech, that has some activity in those settings, then put it through a bioselection process, an enhanced bioselection process. So it will specifically target those cancer types. And so we've sort of done that process and seeing some really interesting, preclinical results to this stage. So it's just taking the learnings, I suppose, from Biotech, where we bioselected for ICAM1, which is expressed on melanoma, and now taking an approach with a different virus and trying to tackle some of these more challenging some of these more challenging cancer types where there's just such a high unmet need.
Well, congratulations on your new venture. Just for the benefit of the audience, I'm going to stick with your old venture. The benefit of 2 years hindsight now, what learnings can you share with the audience with respect to your tenure at Viralytics and the sale process?
I think really, it's the team is really at the end of the day. I mean, first of all, you've got to have an active agent, clearly, and Biotech was bioselected, as I said, by Darren Shaffron and the team in Newcastle to target melanoma, and we're taking a similar approach in this case with our new oncolytic virus. But then, of course, it's the quality of the team, and it's an outstanding team, and really there weren't any missteps as we went through the Viralytics process, and we got a lot of kudos from Merck in terms of their assessment of how we'd progressed and other pharma companies. I think obviously generating clinical data is really important, and we were very aggressive in terms of running studies and recruiting patients, particularly in the US. I think, again, that's very important. Excuse me, and then presenting that data at big conferences in the Northern Hemisphere. That's probably the best business development activity that you can do, essentially, getting in front of the key decision makers from big pharma on their own turf, presenting posters and podium presentations amongst, the leading folks in the sector. So They were all key aspects. The manufacture was very important. Diligence, a lot of diligence efforts was focused on manufacture. So we had to make sure that was, robust and potentially scalable as we moved, as it was going to be moved into pharma companies. And, I guess probably for me too, just spending a lot of time in the US and really getting close to sort of institutional investors, spending a lot of time with big pharma, just sort of feet on the ground in the US. So you're hearing what's going on. You've got a presence and you're establishing yourself in that sort of setting. So they're probably some of the big things. In terms of the final sales process, I guess when I joined Viralytics, I said, okay, to the team, we're going to be at some point, knee deep in a diligence activity where there's dozens of people going through a data room. So everything we do from this point has to be of the highest quality. And I inherited a team that had done things really well, obviously. So there was a need for a dramatic improvement, but, understand that one day there'll be lots of really critical eyes going through that data room, scrutinizing every document. So just do it to the highest order. And this is a team that was capable of doing that. And I'm just really chuffed that we've recruited all those guys to come back and work for us again in Virix.
And can you give us any update as to how the Viralytic assets are going in the hands of Merck?
Well, I guess from, pretty much, after the transaction closed, I was sort of outside the loop, and so I guess all I know is what's in the public domain. It's really exciting actually to see Merck progressing with some big studies. Several hundred patient studies in melanoma, and then they're also looking at studies across a range of solid cancer types. So they're aggressively pursuing this, as far as I can see from what's in the public domain. And in terms of investor presentations, Biotech is still listed. I think they've given it a different name or a different nomenclature, but it's still part of their program. And why wouldn't it be? It is a great drug.
Brilliant. And so I mentioned in Virix, your new gig. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, as I said, we just didn't want to kind of try to find an asset that was, out there and see if we could somehow shoehorn it into working in these indications. What we wanted to do was start de novo, think about the most appropriate oncolytic virus for Darren and his team to sort of generate or develop a sort of a bioselection process, Mark II, a better bioselection process. So we've done that. We put it through the bioselection process. Obviously, that's generated some novel changes in the sequences. We've been able to get a composition of matter patent around that. We've then gone into sort of a small scale production run. And clearly, again, that's the starting point for a further manufacturing effort down the track. Then gone into probably a couple of dozen of cancer cell lines and shown really nice lytic effect in that setting, and now gone into in vivo models with xenografts, and again seeing nice activity in that in vivo setting. So it's remarkable actually, because the team got together. Really, we did a seed round at the end of 2019 and really effectively only got underway back in the labs in Newcastle at sort of early 2020. So for 12 months work to be where we're at is kind of phenomenal and just speaks to the quality of the team. And then as we move forward, we've really got the pathway sort of mapped out in terms of obviously doing preclinical tox now, moving into manufacture, whether that be in this country or in the Northern Hemisphere. We have clinical trial protocols, well developed in these sort of settings. And, so we'll be looking for CROs, getting contract manufacturers in place, and aiming to get into the clinic, early next year.
Well, congratulations. And for those that are old enough, like me, to remember the Blues Brothers, you've got the band back together.
It's exciting, and they're just such a good crew. And I suppose the other aspect is that, what sort of team can you find out there that's had this success, been through the diligence process, and then the team got to spend 12 months with Merck, and just imagine sort of the learning that you go through in that process. I mean, being embedded within big pharma and learning further. So for them then to come back out of that experience, obviously take a break as they, refresh and rejuvenate, and then for them to join in Virix, I mean, it's just exciting, and everyone's very determined and dedicated to move this program forward. I mean, imagine if you can make the sort of changes we saw in melanoma, where you had deep sort of lesions in liver and lung mets, and have those resolve in melanoma through Biotech. If you can tackle colorectal, ovarian and gastric cancer in the same way with this bioselected virus, I mean, this is a motivated team that's excited about trying to tackle those.
Well, I know everyone wishes you good luck, so well done. Now we're going to take additional questions from the audience. So once again, please use your Q&A button on your Zoom screen to submit your questions. There have been some pre-submitted questions, so probably to Malcolm. So I'll start with those ones. What new project are you working on? Well, I think we've answered that one. Where is Envirix in developing their oncolytic virus versus Imugene CF33? Some viralytics folk there as well, I think.
Yeah, look, I don't really sort of follow Imugene that much. So I think that they've sort of said at some point they're 12 months from the clinic, but I'm sure that's all in the public domain. So I guess I'd just refer people to that. I mean, look, we're sort of taking the approach we took with viralytics, where we've got a small RNA virus, and we just think that's the right approach. We think that's, you know, I won't get into the deep science of it, but we think that really triggers the pathway that really inflames these tumours. And so we're targeting the receptors overexpressed on these colorectal, gastric and ovarian cancer. The virus infects and then really inflames them and brings in the T cells that actually kill the cancer. So we think this is the right approach, and we're excited to see if we can, as I say, tackle these cancers with an RNA virus as opposed to DNA type viruses. But and good luck to Imugene. Obviously, they're well financed, and I think they're tackling different tumour types to us anyway.
Okay. And a question: how many employees does Envirix have?
So we've got about 10. We've essentially brought back together the Newcastle teams. There's 10 or 11 up in Newcastle. Essentially, all the key folks from Viralytics, and then there's myself, Robert Vickery, who was CFO at Viralytics. Jen Rosenthal was head of quality and reg. You know, Len Post was a really important director, and Pete Turvey as well, directors in the company. And then as we move forward, you know, one of the key folks in the clinical side of things, we're looking to, he's keen to sort of join when we get just that little bit closer to the clinic. So this is the core of the Viralytics crew.
Well, okay. And this next one, you may have already answered it, and you may choose not to answer it. What are your thoughts on Imugene B-cell IP and investor, given the close connections with Paul Hopper and Viralytics in the past?
Yeah, look, I mean, I haven't studied their IP, obviously. Look, I think we really take a sort of a T-cell approach here. I mean, what you want to do is you want to infect these cancer cells. You want to essentially blow them up with the virus. That exposes the tumour antigens to the immune system, and that drives T-cell production. The T-cells are the ones that really go into the tumour and can interrogate the tumour and say, okay, this is a healthy cell, leave it alone. That's a healthy cell, leave it alone. And no, that's a cancer cell, and we'll knock that out. And it's really that sort of army of T-cells that's enables, you know, these sort of complete responses, or really durable, deep responses we saw with Biotech. So that's sort of the approach that we're taking, and I guess it's got the runs on the board with Biotech.
Okay, thanks for that, Malcolm. A question for both of you. I suspect most of us in the audience will be in line for the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine produced by CSL. And do either of you have any reservations about getting the less efficacious vaccine, particularly with the Johnson & Johnson one-shot vaccine now seemingly, not sure whether it's approved in the US or certainly announced in the US. Any comments on the AZ vaccine that CSL is going to be producing?
Go ahead, Scott.
Look, I don't have any issues at all with lining up for the vaccine. You know, no matter which one. You know, I'm sort of the view that it's going to be good for the community. You know, that we all get vaccinated. You know, particularly those in the high risk group, and I think it's also going to help, you know, the economies open up a lot quicker as well. So I'm very much in the camp of get vaccinated as quickly as possible, without you know, having a particular preference one way or the other as to which one I get.
Do either of you know what percentage of us need to be vaccinated to get herd immunity? Is it like 70%?
Yeah,
Yeah.
look, I'm not sure. I think it's around that.
Yeah, I mean, my point being that, anti-vaxxers, that's fine. They can have their opinion. As some people say, well, the downside of being an anti-vaxxer is that you might not be able to fly overseas. But I don't think we're going to have 25% of the population, avoiding the vaccine. Scott, I think you've answered this already, but a question came through. Would you characterise the current ASX biotech market as having a bull run?
Yes, is a short answer. So I think if you look back over the last 12 months, the broader market's moved up around 10%, and the healthcare part of the market is moved up about the same. We've got a bit of volatility overnight. I've just got my screens on at the moment. I think Nasdaq was down 2.7%. So again, that sort of genius around bond yields is just creating perhaps a little bit of rotation out of some of the tech names and healthcare names into some of the more value stocks. But definitely it's been a bull market. It certainly feels like it, and as I said before, my sort of sense is that we're in for a pretty good 2021.
Love your optimism. And here's the question that you guys get asked every time you speak publicly. Any particular stocks that really pique your interest at the moment?
Yeah, look, we've got we're very excited about a whole bunch of things. So maybe if I can just sort of break it down into a couple of themes and within each theme talk about some of the stocks. But one of the themes that the Morgans Healthcare team's been working around is this concept of hospitals without walls. So basically providing services remotely. So when we talk about that thematic, we talk about ResMed. Some of the smaller players that operate in that space. We've got ResApp, ImpediMed, sort of spring to mind. The other theme that we're particularly interested in is imaging, the imaging market, whether that's radiology or some of the work that's being done there. And again, the companies that sort of fit into that imaging space are Pro Medicus, Max7, Volpara are sort of key picks of ours. You mentioned MicroX in your introduction, Matt. Again, that's a company that's doing some really interesting things in miniaturizing X-ray machines, and they won a major medical research grant earlier this week to help with the early detection of strokes. So, that's a really interesting area for us. Another area that's a little bit left field is medicinal cannabis. With the down scheduling of cannabis, we're of the view that more traditional medicine is going to embrace medicinal cannabis. And to that end, we look at companies like MedLab. Avecho is an interesting company that's doing some work in that space that is probably not well known by the market, but we think they've potentially can do some really interesting things in terms of getting more drug into the body using their technology. Another thematic that is really interesting to us is artificial intelligence or machine learning, and on that front, we floated a small company called Control Bionics late last year, and they're doing some really interesting things in assisted technology, making portable wearable devices for severely disabled people to use the neural signals to help them communicate. So that's a really interesting story on that front. So there's a couple of names for you, for your listeners, a couple of themes: hospitals without walls, the imaging sector, and medicinal cannabis.
That's brilliant. Got just a new question through. Hi, Scott. Do you feel COVID was more of a distraction for some companies that tried to quickly pivot to get into the treatment options?
Yes. I think it was a distraction for some companies, but I think and some pivoted, beautifully, and their share prices, particularly in the early days. I can remember, March, April, anybody that had anything to do with COVID was absolutely being sought after. But I think sort of on a longer term view, we've seen this COVID exit trade with, elective surgery coming back out. You know, companies have really sort of refocused on their cost base. You know, there's been a lot less travel. You know, deals are starting to happen again. And I think, you know, what's interesting to us is just to see what's going to happen in the US, because obviously they've perhaps been locked down for longer and more severely. But I think when they come out, it's going to be pretty powerful over there. So that's why we're really confident that, you know, 2021, once the vaccine rolls out and that confidence is regained, you know, the consumer business will get done, and you know, we're going to see a pretty strong rebound in profitability across many sectors, but healthcare in particular.
Okay. That's quite a nice segue to the next question. Malcolm, you spent a lot of time in the US market. How do US investors compare to Australian investors? And be careful, you're answering to an Australian investor.
Oh, look, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, look, the US market's the biggest and deepest, and people can specialize. I suppose the US institutional investors, you know, typically MD, PhDs, you know, often postdoctoral. The other advantage they have is that they're just seeing biotech CEOs and CSOs on a day-to-day basis. I mean, when I used to go and see them, you know, it was almost certain that they'd seen people in my space or in the oncolytic virus space the day before or the week before or maybe the hour before. So they're really just every minute of every day they're operating this space and thinking about it and hearing from, you know, the folks that they're working it day to day as well. So I think that, you know, when you deal with that sort of group, I mean, it can be obviously very interrogative as you commence, whilst they're trying to figure out whether they want to invest in the company. And by the way, more than 50% of Viral shares were held by, you know, institutional investors from overseas. But once you get through that process and they invest, then, I mean, I had great discussions with, you know, funds in New York and Boston and San Francisco in terms of just, you know, reflecting on the data that we'd presented, thinking about pathways forward. So it sort of moves from a deeply interrogative and somewhat adversarial initial sort of interaction to one that's kind of quite collaborative, and how do we move this program forward? So I would count those folks as some of the most important people that, you know, I used to talk to and deal with, and along with obviously key opinion leaders and you know, the Viralytics. But it's I wouldn't go to any meeting with a, you know, an institutional investor in the US without being deeply and very well prepared, because they know their stuff, and they ask lots of questions that they know the answer to already, and so they have a pretty deep BS meter.
Yeah. And the last question we've got submitted is to Malcolm. Generally speaking, what are some of the key attributes that led to the success of Viralytics? And then I might just add my own thing to that. And you know, and so what do you plan? You know, how do you see that'll flow onto Envirix?
Yeah, look, I mean, obviously the quality of the asset's key. I mean, if you haven't got an active agent, you're in a lot of trouble. And that's why Biotech with the bioselection process in melanoma, you know, clearly was active. And that's why we're sort of taking actually a better bioselection process in this case to tackle these colorectal, ovarian and gastric cancer. So we think there's a really good shot here at having an active agent in those tumor types. It comes back again to things we've talked about: the quality of the team, experience of the team, skills, dedication of the team, obviously, generating the clinical data, presenting that data, getting in the face of pharma, presenting it to them on their turf, I think is really important. I think the US clinical sites are important because when big pharma makes ultimate decisions, I think they like to talk to, you know, clinicians who they've possibly gone to school with and known for 20 or 30 years. So I think US sites are sometimes hard to crack, but are important. Manufacture. I mean, we spent a lot of time and had boots on the ground with our contract manufacturers. So it wasn't just a transactional relationship of here's a contract, now go and make the product. It was really collaborative to make sure they had success in manufacture. And as I think I said earlier, just spending a lot of time in the US. I think I spent more than half my life in the US during Viralytics days, just to get that, just to build up those relationships and really advance the programs. I mean, it's completely immersive. You do nothing else but just focus on the program and take it forward. And that's why I kind of having a little bit of a break between Viralytics and Envirix has been nice, just to say hello to the family again.
And you're ready to do it all again?
Well, I think, you know, if you have an opportunity, how often does this happen that you know, have a team that can just be reassembled and with a bioselection process that you think really has a good shot at making some serious changes and you know, really having an impact on these tumor types. I mean, colorectal is #2 in the US in terms of cancer deaths, and there's no immunotherapy really that has any sort of activity there. So you don't get many opportunities like this in life, and we're really keen to have a good crack at it.
All right, guys, we're going to wind it up now. And just to the audience, the next webinar will be Thursday, the 1st of April at 10:30 a.m., the same time. Thank you to the audience. Your feedback and suggestions are most welcome. If you feel we can improve or you have any suggestions for content, please don't hesitate to email me at matt@horizon3biotech.com. Our thanks go to FB Rice and Monsoon Communications for sponsoring and hosting this webinar. And finally, thank you to Malcolm and Scott for joining us. See you all again soon.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.